Entrepreneurs aren't born, they're brewed. You are now listening to the Entrebrewer Podcast with your host, Adam McChesney. Let's grow!
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is our 100th episode. Crazy to think that we have finally hit that exclusive mark in podcasting. When I first got started, I thought, there's no way I'll get to 100. But hey, here we are. So I wanted to do this episode solo for a few different reasons. Not exactly sure how long the episode is going to go. Got some notes written down. Got some things that we're going to go over. But wanted to do a solo for a couple of different reasons. One of which, I wanted to talk about my journey in podcasting and just how it's impacted my life, my business, my personal brand, and all the things that I'm working on and have worked on over the last 2 years. But also want to share a really cool update about the podcast itself, which I'm going to leave that for the end. So that way I can assure you listen to the whole thing. But I first want to start and just talk about recapping my experience with this podcast. So the idea for Entrebrewer came about in August of 2020. So I had joined a mastermind called Apex, which I know a lot of you people that are listening have probably heard me talk about at some point in time. I've had a lot of guests on that have been inside of that Apex community, but essentially that program taught and teaches, so I'm still a member there, a variety of different aspects of building your machine, right? So building your machine, personal branding, all of that good stuff. And one of those was, hey, go start a podcast. And that was kind of a big thing at the time. And so I'm sitting there in literally August of 2020, I go on Fiverr and I have the idea that I'm going to have a happy hour style podcast about basically entrepreneurship and drinking beer and all these things. So I literally get this Fiverr logo back because I have this idea, and it's this like bright blue with yellow. I mean, it was the most disgusting looking art that I ever had to create the first Entrebrewer logo. If I can find it, I'll post it on social media. But that to be said is I had this idea that I was literally going to get on a podcast with another guest and we were just going to sit there, shoot the crap and drink. And I didn't pull the trigger on it for a variety of different reasons. I didn't know how to start a podcast. I didn't know if I loved the name Entrepreneur, but I didn't know if I wanted to actually have it be a drinking podcast. I didn't know how effective or professional that might be. So I put a pause on that. And then in 2021, I did 75 hard. So I stopped drinking for a little bit. So I'm like, okay, it definitely wouldn't be a good idea to implement that podcast during a time where I'm not drinking, if I'm going to be drinking on the, of course, episodes. And then I had a very busy 2021. So we not only started the auto glass company, we then started the landscape design company, the marketing company took off, and the marketing company then merged with Height Digital, which is where I've been for the last 2.5 years now. And so there was excuse after excuse after excuse. I don't know how to do this. I don't know where to start. I don't want to do this. How am I going to be able to commit the time to be able to do this? Like every excuse about starting a podcast, growing a podcast, all that stuff came into play. So at the end of 2021, going into 2022 is where I got connected again with Garrett and Alex, who run here at Half Go Studios. And they were like, man, you need to come in here. You need to do your podcast in here. Here's the setup that we can do, all these different things. So I took a leap of faith, and here we are. Literally 100 episodes later, it was something that was in the works for 1.5 years before I actually launched the podcast, probably even a little bit longer than that. And I say all of that for a couple of different reasons. Is one, I know that there's people that are listening to this podcast right now that haven't started their own podcast, but told themselves that they would. There is literally going to be no better time to start your podcast than right now. You don't have to have the perfect podcast art cover. You don't have to have the perfect intro and outro. You don't even have to come into a studio like this. You can literally do it from Zoom and with your computer and a microphone and just the camera that's in there. We start to think, right, about all these bells and whistles and all the things that we need to have in order to be the Joe Rogans of the world. My biggest regret about podcasting is that I didn't start it in August of 2020. And of course, I could have started it then and then came into the studio and all these different things. But who knows if I wouldn't have started the podcast in February or March of 2020, like where I would have been with the podcast if this opportunity didn't present itself, right? So huge shout out to the team here, Matt, Garrett, Alex, everybody here has just been absolutely incredible. So if you're here in the St. Louis area and you're looking to start a podcast, or you're currently at home and all that stuff, and you're looking to come in studio, do interviews, all that type of stuff, this is the place that you need to do it. So that's a quick plug and a shout out, and I'm not getting paid to do that. That's just literally my experience, and they have been incredible to work with. But kind of circling back is the impact that I've had over the last, now coming up on 2 years of doing this podcast, the impact that this podcast has had to not only allow people to come on here and tell their stories, but for me to connect with other people in my sphere of the world by telling the stories of other people. I've helped cultivate so many things. People have literally been connected and started businesses together because of my podcast. People have done business together. They've found referral partners. They found friends. They found a new way of thinking about something. And people have shared some very, very personal and vulnerable stuff on here that has allowed other people to realize that they're not alone. Whether it's drinking or drug use, whether it's literally relationships with their spouses, or how to run a business. Like, there's so many things that we've talked about in these last 100 episodes that if I would have not done that, I would have been doing a disservice to not just myself, but more importantly, to my audience, to my supporters, and to the world in general. There's people that listen to this podcast from all over the world and have consistently started to do that since the first episode. So that's one key aspect. Another key aspect for me is just growing as an individual. When I first did episode 1, and even to like episode probably like 10, 15, 20, is like I would literally get in here and sweat, right? I was comfortable on camera to a degree, but I wasn't super, super comfortable like running the show and interviewing people and doing all of that stuff. So in the beginning, I had like, if you remember, up until like episode probably 50 or 60, I had like these set questions that I would go and I would ask everybody through. And it helped me when getting started of like having a consistent cadence, having some type of cohesiveness and all of that stuff, but it felt like really robotic. And I know a lot of people, like I didn't get a ton of feedback that it felt that way, but like I could feel it that way. I know my guests could feel it that way, that I was trying to like push through and weave through a question or a topic because we needed to get to it before like the episode finished. Like it was the Entrebrewer process, right? And then I started to pull back from that. And when I started to pull back from that, I had all these like new thoughts and these new feelings about podcasting where I was listening more, right? I was becoming a better host because not just was I interviewing people off a scripted list of questions, but I was literally having conversations and with no agenda and just listening to what our guests were saying and then asking better questions based on the conversation. And that not just helped me in being a podcast host, but also being a podcast guest and speaking on stage and communicating with my people in my personal life and my wife and family members and friends, but my team, potential clients, current clients, all these things. I've been such a better communicator by showing up here each and every single time I do. So typically, just to kind of like run through my cadence, I typically do 2 times a month. I'll come in here, I'll record 2 episodes and then have them batched out. So then that way I'm not like off the cuff doing them. There's structure. There's all these different things, which has helped me produce 100, podcasts. I know a lot of people, I shouldn't say I know a lot of people, but I know people who have gotten to 100 podcasts, right? But I know very few people that have gotten to 100 podcasts that have done just 1 episode a week that have not skipped a single episode. Like that to me is a huge accomplishment, one that like I'm very proud of and something that like it is not to be taken lightly. So that is all done in part to the setup, of course, that I have, to my amazing guests, to being able to just show up and deliver and do it all, but not be like, I have a podcast today and then I have one tomorrow and then I have one next Thursday. Like goes into a bigger opportunity of like how you can just time block and effectively manage your time. So that way you're getting the most out. You're not switching all these different hats. And it's not been all like, rainbows and sunshines. I've had multiple people cancel on me. Of course, after they cancel on me, usually the same day when I have to, I think at one or two times I just had to show up and like go off the cuff, or I had to call somebody that was like on deck waiting to go. And typically those are the people that like I didn't have on my list ready to go, but they're like, hey, if you ever have an opportunity, I know you have some big guests coming up, throw me in there. So shout out to those people, not shout out to the people that, didn't respect my time, but like those are things that ultimately happen. And it even intensifies when you're coming in here and of course, like paying for studio time, right? It's just a respect thing, but it at least allows me to effectively manage the podcast and all these other things. And then my incredible team behind the scenes, not only here at Half Coast, but also at Height, that's starting to make the YouTube thumbnails and then the podcast posts that you see all over. They do a really good job of like helping me compile all that stuff, because it's one thing to just launch the podcast. It's another thing to launch the podcast and then promote every single episode, do it every single week like clockwork. I'm here on a Thursday right now, just posted all my stuff earlier today on Facebook of today's podcast, and we'll continue to post throughout the rest of the day and the rest of the week until the next episode comes out. So podcasting has opened up so many opportunities. It's allowed for me to get connected with some incredible people that if I didn't have the podcast, it's not to say that I wouldn't have met some of these people or been connected to some of these people, but I wouldn't have gotten to know them and them getting the chance to know me on the level that I've been able to do. So there's so many advantageous reasons as to why you need to either start a podcast, take your podcast more seriously, or restart your podcast if you're not currently doing all of those things right now. Not a whole lot else to say. I don't want to, really keep it too long. I just really wanted to hammer home my experience in starting this podcast, what the journey has been like, where it started, how we got to right here, right now, everything with Entrebrewer, all these amazing things that we've done leading up to the big announcement. All right. So my big announcement is that the Entrebrewer Podcast will be no more. This is actually the last quote unquote episode, if you will, of the Entrebrewer Podcast. And so with the next episode and moving forward, we are rebranding. And we are rebranding the podcast to Builders of Authority. So if you've been following me on social media at all recently, then you've likely heard me talk about Builders of Authority. And I think Builders of Authority is a much better brand for the podcast for so many different reasons, which I'll get into. It makes all the sense in the world because of what I'm working on with Builders of Authority. Entrebrewer was kind of its own separate thing of all the different things that I had, and it wasn't really easily transferable into some of the new projects that I'm working on. So, of course, I talk all the time about personal branding. That's what Builders of Authority is. But if you look at like the top of the funnel of what I'm doing, right, you have Adam McChesney. And then under Adam McChesney, you have Height Digital. You have now Builders of Authority, which encompasses the program, the course, the mastermind, and then now this new podcast, as well as coaching and consulting and all of that stuff. Entrebrewer was just adding a fourth layer to everything, and I want to keep it to 3 pillars under the big umbrella of Adam McChesney. So, Builders of Authority, if you haven't heard about it yet or want a little bit more information, it's really a 3-pronged approach of what we have, 4-pronged approach actually, but there is a free Facebook group that if you just go and type in on Facebook, it's called Builders of Authority. And essentially I go live in there once a week and you'll have all the access to the past lives that I do, but it is a free quote unquote group where I am teaching personal branding tactics and strategies consistently each and every single week. We have, as of this recording, a little over 500 members. It's been about a month since the Facebook group launched, but I'm going all in on personal branding, coaching, and consulting moving forward, as well as obviously continuing everything with Height Digital. But this is kind of like my new sphere of the world, new project. It's something I've been working on for a very long time. It's something that I put off again for a very, very long time until I felt confident and comfortable, but that people wanted to not just get the information, but pay for the information as well. It's one thing to continue to provide all this value, but my time is also valuable. And in order to do that, I had to start charging in some sort of fashion. So About a month and a half ago, I did a free webinar, which outlined the free PDF on 7 steps to $1 million business, which is what I did in 15 months because of personal branding. So if you want that PDF, let me know. But I did a webinar on that, had over 300 people register for that webinar, which was absolutely incredible. And then I launched Builders of Authority, kind of the extracurriculars. So we are going to be launching a course here this month. So you can pay to get access to that course. It's a one-time course, A to Z, on everything personal branding. At the time of this recording, it might be out, it might not be out, but you can pay and get it for a one-time fee of $999 before it launches, and it will be $1999 after launch. So it's a one-time fee, get you access to all that good stuff. But the really cool things, the things that I'm spending a lot of time and energy on right now, is the mastermind and the inner circle. So with the mastermind, that's our most popular offer. Essentially, the mastermind allows you to get access to the course that's going to be launching. You get a 45-minute onboarding call with myself. So you just go over where you're at in business and your personal brand, what your goals are for 2024 and beyond, and what you want out of your personal brand. My goal with all of this stuff, Builders of Authority from the top down, is to help empower entrepreneurs to be more than just their business. So many of us have built a business on the backing of the business. Our identity is tied to that business. We struggle when something happens to said business, and when we want to go do other things, people only know us as X, Y, and Z. So I could go on for days and talk about why people are joining the program and why they're already seeing success just a month in. Feel free to shoot me a message and we can set up a call to kind of discuss that stuff further. You can also go over to buildauthority.co and see all of the different options that we have there. But with that mastermind program, we have 3 weekly calls. So one is a weekly training on Wednesdays where we're actually diving a little bit more in depth to what I'm talking about in the free training on Tuesdays with the whole overarching group. And we're just diving in and masterminding and collectively collaborating as a group and facilitating conversations and educations based on that. So there's 15, now 16 actually members. Somebody signed up this morning in that group and continuing to grow. That cost is $500 a month for that group, or $5,000 for a year. So you get a 45-minute onboarding call, you get access to the course, you get access to a private Facebook group, and you get all the past recordings as well as 3 weekly calls. And then we have the inner circle. So the inner circle, I'm not really actively promoting right now because I already have 4 people that are in that program. But essentially, it's everything that you get with the course and the mastermind, but it's an additional 2 calls a month. And that is just one-to-one coaching with myself on your personal brand. So I'm not actively promoting that right now. I'm kind of picking and choosing the people that I take on, but that's $1,000 a month or $10,000 for the year. So if any of that stuff is of interest to you, again, you can head over to buildauthority.co. You can also find us on our Facebook group at Builders of Authority. But Builders of Authority is going to be the focal point of a lot of what I'm doing moving forward, which goes into why we are doing this rebrand. Builders of Authority, as the podcast goes, will continue to be a podcast where you get all of the same impactful information. We're going to continue to bring high-level entrepreneurs and guests on the show to interview them about their journey and about how they've, more importantly, built authority in their space. So some changes coming. Again, my goal is to do a little bit more off the cuff. I've been studying some of the most impactful podcast hosts, the ones that are absolutely crushing it, the ones that I enjoy listening to, and I know many of you all do too as well. So instead of just showing up and saying the exact same thing and opening the exact same way and all these other things, there is going to be a little bit more of off-the-cuff stuff, which is what I'm best at doing, to be quite frankly and honest with you anyway. So I'm excited for that. Some of our upcoming guests, as I've hinted at on social media, are the biggest names I've ever had on. So I'm not going to spoil it here, but it's going to be absolutely incredible. So this is Rebrand is coming at a great time on the 100th episode. Currently working on the new podcast cover, intro, outro, all that behind the scenes stuff. So it all makes sense. I want to thank you for listening to not only this episode, but I'm sure if you're listening to this episode, you've probably listened to at least another episode or maybe all of the episodes on the entrepreneur journey thus far. I would not be where I'm at in this journey without you all. Of course, I would continue to show up. I don't know if our stats and our numbers are great or not, but I enjoy doing it, but it makes it a lot better when I hear from you all about specifically your feedback on a particular episode and all those things. So as we move forward, if you can be sure, and please, please, please be sure to do this, subscribe, download, share our content, tag me, tag our guests, leave a 5-star review. There's going to be a lot of incredible things coming in the next 100 episodes that we're doing here with the new Builders of Authority podcast. It's been a pleasure having you listen to the Entrebrewer Podcast. But on that note, we'll see you all next week. And for the last time, entrepreneurs aren't born, they are brewed.
I'm an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs aren't born, they're brewed. Thank you for listening to Entrebrewer Podcast with your host, Adam McChesney. Let's grow!